Ladies and gentlemen, before we even begin to debate which number carries more danger, we must first ground ourselves in understanding what these numbers truly represent. Too often, I encounter individuals who can recite their blood pressure reading, but have no real connection to what those figures are saying about their body. And that, in itself, is where the problem begins, because when you do not understand a message, you are far more likely to ignore its warning. When you hear a blood pressure reading, let us say 120/80, you are not just hearing numbers. You are listening to the rhythm of your cardiovascular system translated into measurable force. The first number, the systolic, is the pressure generated when the heart contracts. In that moment, your heart is actively pushing blood into the arteries, supplying oxygen and nutrients to every organ, every tissue, every cell that depends on it for survival. It is the peak pressure, the surge, the moment of action. Think of it as the force of a wave crashing onto the shore. Powerful, necessary, but potentially destructive if it becomes too intense. Now, the second number, the diastolic, is often overlooked, and I would argue misunderstood. This is the pressure in your arteries when the heart is at rest between beats. But let me be very clear, rest does not mean inactivity. It is during this phase that the heart itself is being nourished, that the coronary arteries are receiving blood flow, that the system is resetting in preparation for the next contraction. If systolic pressure is the moment of exertion, diastolic pressure is the moment of recovery. And any system, biological or mechanical, that fails to recover properly will eventually fail under pressure. So, what we are looking at is not two competing numbers, but two phases of a single, continuous cycle. One reflects how forcefully your heart is working. The other reflects how well your blood vessels are maintaining stability when the heart pauses. Together, they form a complete picture of cardiovascular function. Separately, they can mislead. Let me bring this closer to home. Imagine driving a car. The systolic pressure is like pressing the accelerator. It tells us how much force is being applied to move forward. The diastolic pressure, however, is like the condition of your brakes and the steadiness of your steering. You may have a powerful engine, but if your control systems are compromised, you are heading toward danger. Likewise, you may feel calm, you may feel fine, but your blood vessels could be under silent strain. And this is where many people make a critical mistake. They focus on a single number, usually the systolic, because it is often highlighted in conversations, reports, and even casual discussions. But the body does not function in isolation, and neither should our interpretation of its signals. When you ignore the diastolic pressure, you are essentially ignoring how your system behaves when it is supposed to be stable. And stability, ladies and gentlemen, is the foundation of health. Now, let us go a step deeper. Blood pressure is not static. It changes throughout the day, influenced by stress, activity, diet, emotions, and even sleep. But despite these fluctuations, there is a pattern, a baseline, that tells us whether the system is functioning within safe limits. When the systolic number is elevated, it may suggest that the heart is working harder than it should, perhaps due to narrowed or stiffened arteries. When the diastolic number is elevated, it may indicate that the vessels themselves are not relaxing as they should, maintaining a constant state of resistance. Both scenarios carry implications, and both deserve attention, but without understanding what each number represents, it becomes very easy to dismiss one while fearing the other. And that imbalance in understanding leads to imbalance in care. I have seen patients who panic over a slightly elevated systolic reading, while completely overlooking a consistently high diastolic value. I have also seen the reverse, individuals reassured by a normal, lower number, even when the upper number is creeping into dangerous territory. In both cases, the issue is not just the numbers, it is the interpretation of those numbers. Health, at its core, is about awareness. Not fear, not anxiety, but informed awareness. When you understand that the systolic number reflects the force of blood against your artery walls during contraction, and the diastolic reflects the pressure maintained during relaxation, you begin to see the bigger picture. You begin to understand that your heart and blood vessels are engaged in a constant dialogue, one pushing, the other receiving, one contracting, the other stabilizing. And if that dialogue becomes strained, if the pushing becomes too forceful, or the receiving becomes too resistant, the consequences do not appear overnight. They build quietly, gradually, often without symptoms, until one day, the body can no longer compensate. So, before we ask which number is more dangerous, we must first ask ourselves a more important question. Are we truly listening to what these numbers are telling us? Because when you understand them, you do not just see risk. You see opportunity. Opportunity to intervene early, to make adjustments, to protect the very system that sustains your life every second of every day. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where true prevention begins, with understanding, not assumption. Now that we have established a clear understanding of what these two numbers represent, let us move forward into a reality that many of you may have already encountered in clinics, health reports, and medical conversations. The systolic number, the top figure, often receives the most attention, and there is a reason for that. It is not by accident, nor is it mere habit. It is rooted in years of observation, research, and clinical experience that consistently point to one truth. When systolic pressure rises, the risks become more immediate, more visible, and often more severe. You see, as we move through life, our bodies change in ways we do not always notice. One of the most significant changes occurs within our blood vessels. In youth, arteries are flexible, elastic, able to expand and recoil with each heartbeat. This flexibility helps to cushion the force of blood being pumped from the heart. But over time, due to aging, lifestyle, and environmental factors, these vessels begin to lose that elasticity. They become stiffer, less forgiving, less able to absorb pressure. And when that happens, the systolic number begins to climb. Now, why does this matter so much? Because systolic pressure is a direct reflection of the force your heart must generate to push blood through those increasingly rigid pathways. When the arteries are stiff, the heart must work harder. And when the heart works harder over long periods, it begins to wear down. This is not a sudden event. It is a gradual process, one that unfolds quietly, often without pain, without obvious symptoms, but with very real consequences. Elevated systolic pressure has been closely linked to some of the most serious health conditions we face today. It increases the risk of stroke by placing excessive force on the delicate blood vessels in the brain. It contributes to heart attacks by accelerating damage to the arteries that supply the heart itself. It affects the kidneys, impairing their ability to filter waste effectively. And perhaps most concerning of all, it does this silently. Many individuals with high systolic pressure feel completely normal, completely unaware that their bodies are under strain. This is why, particularly in adults over the age of 50, systolic pressure becomes a critical focus. It is not that diastolic pressure loses importance, it does not. But systolic pressure becomes a more reliable indicator of long-term cardiovascular risk. It tells us how the system is coping with age, with stress, with accumulated wear and tear. It reveals whether the heart is operating under conditions that are sustainable, or whether it is being pushed beyond its optimal limits. But let us not reduce this to age alone. Lifestyle plays a powerful role. Diets high in salt, low in nutrients, lack of physical activity, chronic stress, smoking. These factors all contribute to the stiffening of arteries and the elevation of systolic pressure. And what makes this particularly challenging is that these are not dramatic, one-time events. They are daily habits, repeated over years, shaping the internal environment of the body in ways we often underestimate. I often tell people that systolic pressure is like a spotlight. It shines on the cumulative impact of how you have been living. It reflects not just what is happening in a single moment, but what has been happening over time. And when that number begins to rise consistently, it is not simply a reading. It is a message. A message that the system is under pressure, that adjustments are needed, that attention is required. Now, here is where I want you to think critically, because while systolic pressure is often emphasized, the danger lies in how we respond to that emphasis. Some people hear that the top number is more important, and they begin to ignore the bottom number entirely. Others become fixated on lowering the systolic value without addressing the underlying causes that led to its elevation. Both approaches miss the point. The goal is not just to reduce a number. It is to restore balance. When systolic pressure is high, it is a signal that something within the cardiovascular system is not functioning optimally. It may be the arteries, it may be the heart, it may be the interaction between multiple systems. And addressing it requires a comprehensive approach, one that considers diet, movement, stress management, and, when necessary, medical intervention. There is also an emotional dimension to this. Many people associate high blood pressure with fear, with anxiety, with a sense of impending danger. And while it is important to take it seriously, it is equally important to approach it with clarity and purpose. Fear alone does not lead to change, understanding does. When you understand why systolic pressure rises, when you understand what it represents, you are far more equipped to respond effectively. Let me bring this into perspective. Imagine a building with a plumbing system under increasing pressure. If the pipes become rigid and the pressure continues to rise, the risk of rupture increases. You may not see the strain from the outside, but internally, the system is being tested. Systolic pressure is that internal gauge. It tells us how much force is being exerted, how much strain the system is Arabic, Ta-Arabic, Het-Arabic, Meme-Arabic, Lam-ing, and how close it may be to failure if left unaddressed. And yet, despite all of this, there is a powerful message of hope embedded within it. Because unlike many conditions that appear suddenly and without warning, elevated systolic pressure often develops gradually. It provides an opportunity, a window of time in which we can act, adjust, and prevent more serious outcomes. It gives us a chance to intervene before damage becomes irreversible. So when you hear that the systolic number gets the spotlight, understand that it is not about creating fear or assigning blame. It is about recognizing a pattern, identifying a risk, and responding with intention. It is about using the information available to us to protect the heart, the brain, the kidneys, the very organs that sustain life. And as we continue this conversation, I want you to carry this understanding with you. The systolic number is not just a measurement. It is a reflection of force, of resistance, of the ongoing interaction between your heart and your blood vessels. And when that reflection begins to show strain, it is not something to ignore, postpone, or underestimate. Because in the language of the body, rising pressure is never just noise, it is a call to act. And now, having given due attention to the force we can see, let us turn our focus to the force that often goes unnoticed, the quiet, persistent pressure that exists when the heart is at rest. Because if systolic pressure is the visible expression of effort, then diastolic pressure is the silent measure of resistance. It does not announce itself loudly. It does not always trigger immediate concern, but make no mistake, it carries its own weight of consequence. You see, the diastolic number reflects what is happening in your blood vessels between heartbeats. It tells us how much pressure remains in the arteries when the heart relaxes. And that moment of relaxation is not a pause in function. It is a critical phase of recovery, of nourishment, of preparation for the next cycle. The heart itself depends on this phase to receive oxygen, rich blood through the coronary arteries. So when diastolic pressure is elevated, it is not simply a number rising. It is an indication that even in rest, the system is under strain. Now here is where the danger becomes subtle. High diastolic pressure is particularly common in younger individuals, and because youth is often associated with strength and resilience, it is frequently overlooked. A young person may feel energetic, active, and completely unaware that their blood vessels are maintaining an unusually high level of tension. There are no alarms, no immediate symptoms, no clear signals that something is wrong. And yet, beneath that surface, the cardiovascular system is working against a constant resistance. Think of it this way. If systolic pressure is like pushing water through a hose, diastolic pressure is the tightness of the hose itself. If the hose remains constricted, the pressure within it does not fully release. Over time, that sustained tension begins to affect the integrity of the entire system. The heart must adapt, the vessels must endure, and gradually, changes begin to take place, changes that are not immediately visible, but deeply significant. One of the key concerns with elevated diastolic pressure is that it reflects increased peripheral resistance. In simpler terms, the smaller blood vessels throughout the body are not relaxing as they should. They remain slightly narrowed, slightly tense, creating a constant level of pressure that the heart must work against. And while this may not produce dramatic spikes like systolic pressure, it creates a steady, unrelenting burden. Over time, this can lead to thickening of the heart muscle, particularly the left ventricle, as it adapts to pump against this resistance. It can also contribute to early changes in the blood vessel walls, setting the stage for future complications. What begins as a subtle imbalance can evolve into a more complex cardiovascular issue if left unaddressed. And yet, because diastolic pressure does not always dominate the conversation, it is often underestimated. People may hear that their systolic number is within range and assume that all is well, even when the diastolic number is consistently elevated. This false reassurance can delay necessary action, allowing the underlying issue to persist. I want you to understand that the body does not differentiate between loud and quiet problems. It responds to stress, whether that stress is sudden and forceful or steady and prolonged. Elevated diastolic pressure represents the latter, a continuous strain that does not give the system adequate time to reset. And when the system cannot reset, it cannot function optimally. There is also an important temporal aspect to consider. High diastolic pressure often appears earlier in life, sometimes decades before systolic pressure begins to rise significantly. In that sense, it can serve as an early warning sign, a signal that the vascular system is beginning to lose its ability to regulate itself effectively. If recognized and addressed early, it provides an opportunity to alter the trajectory of one's health. But that opportunity is only meaningful if it is taken seriously. Ignoring elevated diastolic pressure because it seems less urgent is like ignoring a slow leak in a foundation. It may not cause immediate damage, but over time it weakens the structure, and by the time visible signs appear, the problem has already progressed. Now, let us also consider the role of lifestyle once again. Factors such as chronic stress, poor dietary habits, lack of physical activity, and even insufficient sleep can all contribute to increased vascular tension. These are not dramatic events, they are patterns, repeated daily, shaping the internal environment of the body. And because their effects accumulate gradually, they are easy to dismiss. But the body keeps a record. Every day of sustained tension, every moment of inadequate recovery, contributes to the overall state of the cardiovascular system. Elevated diastolic pressure is one of the ways that record becomes visible. It is a reflection of how well, or how poorly, the body is managing its baseline level of stress. And here is something I want you to reflect on deeply. True health is not just about how the body performs under pressure, but how it behaves in moments of rest. Because it is in those moments that repair occurs, that balance is restored, that resilience is built. If the body cannot achieve a state of relative calm internally, even when externally at rest, then the foundation of health is compromised. So when we talk about the hidden danger of diastolic pressure, we are not speaking of something mysterious or abstract. We are speaking of a very real, very measurable condition that reflects the underlying tone of the vascular system. It is quiet, yes, but it is not insignificant. As we continue to explore this question of which number is more dangerous, I want you to carry this understanding with you. Danger is not always defined by intensity. Sometimes it is defined by persistence, by what continues day after day, unnoticed, unchallenged, until it becomes part of the body's new normal. And that is precisely why elevated diastolic pressure deserves our attention, not because it shouts, but because it whispers for so long that it risks being ignored. And so, after examining the force of contraction and the persistence of resistance, we arrive at the question that seems to demand a simple answer: which number is more dangerous? But by now, you can already sense that this is the wrong question to ask, or at the very least, an incomplete one, because the body does not operate in isolated fragments, and health cannot be reduced to a single figure on a chart. The truth is, systolic and diastolic pressures are not opponents in a contest. They are partners in a system. They rise and fall together, they influence one another, and most importantly, they reflect different dimensions of the same underlying reality. How well your cardiovascular system is functioning as a whole. To focus on one while neglecting the other is to misunderstand the very nature of the system we are trying to protect. Let me explain this in a way that brings it into clear perspective. Imagine listening to a piece of music. The melody may capture your attention. It is prominent, it is expressive, it stands out. But beneath that melody is a rhythm, steady and consistent, giving structure and balance to the entire composition. If you remove the rhythm, the melody loses its coherence. If the rhythm becomes unstable, the entire piece begins to fall apart. In this analogy, systolic pressure is the melody, and diastolic pressure is the rhythm. Both are essential. Both must be in harmony. When either number deviates from its normal range, it is not just a localized issue. It is a signal that the harmony has been disrupted. A high systolic reading may indicate that the heart is pushing too hard against stiffened vessels. A high diastolic reading may suggest that the vessels themselves are not relaxing adequately. But in both cases, the underlying message is the same. The system is under stress, and that stress must be addressed comprehensively. This is where many people, even with the best intentions, go off course. They begin to chase numbers. They celebrate when one improves, even if the other remains problematic. They adjust habits or medications with the goal of lowering a specific figure rather than restoring overall balance. And while it is certainly important to bring both numbers within a healthy range, the deeper objective is not numerical perfection. It is physiological stability. Because you can, in some cases, lower one number while inadvertently affecting the other. You can create a situation where the systolic pressure appears controlled, but the diastolic pressure drops too low, reducing adequate blood flow during the heart's resting phase. Or you may focus on improving diastolic pressure, while ignoring rising systolic values that continue to strain the arteries. These imbalances are not always immediately obvious, but they matter. This is why the approach to blood pressure must be thoughtful, individualized, and grounded in understanding. It is not about applying a one-size-fits-all solution. It is about recognizing patterns, identifying contributing factors, and making adjustments that support the entire cardiovascular system. Diet, physical activity, stress management, sleep quality, and when necessary, medical treatment. All of these elements must work together. And let us not forget the human element in all of this. Behind every reading is a person, a life, a set of circumstances that cannot be captured by numbers alone. Two individuals may have the same blood pressure reading, yet their overall health profiles may be entirely different. One may be physically active, managing stress well, and simply experiencing age-related changes. The other may be dealing with chronic stress, poor nutrition, and multiple underlying conditions. The numbers are the same, but the context is not. So when we ask which number is more dangerous, we must shift our thinking. The real question is not about choosing one over the other. It is about understanding what each number is telling us and how those messages fit together. It is about seeing the full picture rather than focusing on a single detail. I often remind people that the body speaks in patterns, not in isolated events. Blood pressure is one of the ways it communicates those patterns. A single reading may not tell the whole story, but consistent trends reveal a great deal. They show us whether the system is adapting well or struggling to maintain balance. They guide us toward areas that need attention, and they provide a framework for meaningful intervention. And perhaps most importantly, they remind us that health is dynamic. It is not a fixed state, but an ongoing process. The goal is not to achieve a perfect number once and consider the job done. The goal is to maintain a state of balance over time, to respond to changes as they arise, and to remain attentive to the signals the body provides. There is also a deeper lesson here, one that extends beyond blood pressure. It is the understanding that in complex systems, whether in the body, in relationships, or in life itself, focusing on a single element rarely leads to lasting solutions. True stability comes from balance, from the alignment of multiple factors working together in harmony. So as you leave this conversation, I do not want you to remember just one number, or to fixate on one aspect of your health. I want you to carry a broader awareness, an awareness that your heart and blood vessels are engaged in a continuous, coordinated effort to sustain you. An awareness that both systolic and diastolic pressures are vital parts of that effort. And an awareness that caring for your health means respecting the complexity of that system, not simplifying it to a single measure. Because in the end, it is not about choosing which number to fear. It is about understanding how both numbers guide you toward better health, if only you are willing to listen. And when you truly listen, you realize that the answer was never one or the other, it was always both.